Project 2025, quick review, book notes. Chapter 1, Dismantling Federal Agencies and Restructuring the Government. Project 2025 aims to reshape the federal government by consolidating executive branch power, eliminating the Department of Education and Homeland Security, reclassifying federal workers as political appointees, firing up to 50,000 government employees, abolishing diversity initiatives in the Pentagon, overhauling the Department of Justice and FBI, and implementing changes within the first 180 days. Chapter 2, Implementing Schedule. F, to reclassify federal workers as political appointees. Project 2025 proposes reinstating Schedule F to reclassify 50,000 employees as political appointees, increasing presidential control over the federal workforce, prioritizing implementation across multiple agencies, facilitating dismissal of federal employees, replacing career officials with ideologically aligned individuals, and reducing the federal workforce by up to 3 million jobs. Chapter 3, Abolishing Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Initiatives in the Pentagon. Project 2025 calls for halting DEI training and diversity-focused recruitment, eliminating diversity considerations in military promotions, closing DEI offices in the Pentagon and military branches, redirecting DEI funds to combat training and equipment, eliminating DoD's diversity and inclusion strategic plan, reviewing general promotions to prioritize core military roles, and giving the President power to reduce generals advancing DEI initiatives. Chapter 4, Restricting Abortion Access and Penalizing Providers. Project 2025 proposes limiting abortion medication by enforcing the Comstock Act, penalizing abortion providers, stricter surveillance of abortion numbers in each state, cutting federal funding for non-compliant states, restricting federal funding for abortion services, promoting heterosexual couples as an ideal, natural family structure, and using executive orders and federal agency actions to implement rules. Chapter 5, Overhauling the Department of Justice and FBI. Project 2025 recommends increasing political control through more appointees, ending DOJ's independence from the White House, redirecting the Civil Rights Division to prosecute anti-white racism, curtailing consent decrees between DOJ and local police departments, holding the FBI director accountable to the President, ending FBI efforts to combat misinformation, and implementing changes through a 180-day playbook. Chapter 6, Scaling Back Medicare and Social Security. Project 2025 proposes privatizing aspects of Medicare and Social Security, reducing federal program coverage and benefits, introducing competition into Medicare, allowing private alternatives to Social Security, adjusting eligibility requirements, shifting more control to states, and emphasizing individual responsibility in healthcare decisions. Chapter 7, Reversing Climate Change, Policies, and Focusing on Fossil Fuels. Project 2025 calls for slashing federal funding for renewable energy research, boosting fossil fuel industry production, rolling back environmental regulations, potentially withdrawing from international climate agreements, loosening emission standards, expanding offshore drilling and federal land exploration, facilitating innovations in the civilian nuclear industry, and streamlining approval processes for pipelines. Chapter 8, Eliminating the Department of Education. Project 2025 proposes transferring essential functions to other agencies, moving education-related civil rights enforcement to the Department of Justice, transferring educational research to the Department of Health and Human Services, returning control of education policy to state and local governments, reducing or eliminating federal education funding, ending federal grant programs for K through 12 education, dismantling the Office for Civil Rights within the Department of Education, and eliminating federal regulations on school curricula. Chapter 9, Strengthening Border Security and Immigration Enforcement. Project 2025 recommends creating a new cabinet-level department focused on immigration, completing border wall construction, expanding Border Patrol agents, tightening asylum rules, expanding detention facilities, identifying and deporting illegal immigrants, withholding federal funding from sanctuary cities, implementing a nationwide mandatory E-Verify system, reducing legal immigration levels, and implementing a merit-based system. Chapter 10, Promoting School Choice and Voucher Programs. Project 2025 advocates expanding voucher programs for private school attendance, implementing education savings accounts, increasing charter schools, supporting homeschooling, and implementing standardized testing for accountability. Additionally, it focuses on reforming public schools, proposing federal legislation for voucher programs and ESAs, and creating a federal office to oversee school choice initiatives. Chapter 11, Reducing Federal Regulations Across Various Sectors. Project 2025 proposes a comprehensive review to eliminate agency rules, an executive order requiring 2 regulations to be cut for every new one, and stricter cost-benefit analysis for new regulations. It also includes reducing environmental regulations, financial sector deregulation, easing drilling restrictions, scaling back Affordable Care Act requirements, cutting labor regulations, reducing regulatory burdens on small businesses, eliminating the Clean Power Plan, and repealing the Waters of the United States rule. Chapter 12, Expanding Domestic Energy Production, including oil and gas. Project 2025 calls for opening federal lands and offshore areas for exploration, rolling back environmental regulations, streamlining the permitting process, and cutting renewable energy research funding. It also supports fossil fuel technologies, reopening the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge for oil and gas leasing, reviving the Keystone XL pipeline project, easing fracking restrictions on federal lands, revising the Clean Power Plan, and reducing wind and solar energy subsidies. Chapter 13, Reforming the Tax Code to reduce corporate and individual rates. Project 2025 proposes reducing corporate tax rate from 21% to 18%, simplifying the tax code by eliminating deductions and loopholes, creating two individual tax brackets, 15% and 30%, imposing a 15% tax rate on capital gains and dividends, retaining and expanding tax-preferred savings accounts, requiring a 3/5 vote for future tax increases, phasing in changes gradually, eliminating or reducing various tax expenditures, reforming the Federal Reserve to focus on inflation targeting. Chapter 14, Prioritizing Religious Liberty Protections. Project 2025 aims to infuse government and society with Christian values, increase protection for religious expression in schools, support religious schools through voucher programs, expand conscience protections for healthcare providers, strengthen protections for religious organizations' hiring practices, direct federal agencies to prioritize religious liberty, appoint judges supporting broader religious liberty protections, protect religious objections to LGBTQ+ rights, advocate for stronger protections for businesses refusing service based on beliefs. Chapter 15, Restructuring Federal Healthcare Programs. Project 2025 proposes shifting Medicare toward privatization, converting federal funding to block grants for Medicaid, altering Medicaid matching rates, imposing work requirements and time limits on beneficiaries, allowing Medicaid recipients to convert coverage into vouchers, reducing federal oversight of Medicaid, promoting market-based approaches to social services, scaling back various federal programs, reducing federal regulations in healthcare. In Chapter 16, Reforming Federal Welfare Programs. Project 2025. Advocates scaling back social services, shifting responsibility to states and private organizations, implementing stricter work requirements and time limits, converting federal welfare programs into block grants, tightening eligibility requirements, encouraging the involvement of religious and community organizations, and streamlining welfare programs. Chapter 17, Expanding Second Amendment Rights. Project 2025 proposes federal legislation to ensure uniform protection, appointing pro-gun judges and Supreme Court justices, eliminating gun-free zones in schools and public places, national reciprocity for concealed carry permits, streamlining the firearm purchase and carry process, repealing the National Firearms Act, abolishing the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, expanding access to public lands for hunting and shooting, and promoting responsible firearm use education. Chapter 18, Reshaping Foreign Policy with an America First approach. Project 2025 outlines a narrower definition of U.S. national interests, reviewing international agreements and treaties, overhauling foreign aid programs, implementing a protectionist trade policy, shifting military strategy to focus on direct threats, a skeptical approach to international organizations, stricter immigration policies, achieving energy independence, emphasizing cybersecurity and technological superiority, and a pragmatic approach to human rights and democracy promotion. Chapter 19, Reforming Election Laws and Voting Procedures. Project 2025 Advocates. Strict voter ID laws, eliminating or reducing mail-in voting, limiting early voting periods, regular voter roll maintenance, enhancing poll watchers' rights, banning ballot harvesting, using paper ballots in all elections, securing election infrastructure against cyber threats, passing federal legislation to standardize election laws, and creating an election integrity task force within the Department of Justice. Chapter 20, Addressing Perceived Bias in Tech Companies and Social Media Platforms. Project 2025 proposes modifying Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act, antitrust scrutiny of major tech firms, transparency and content moderation policies, political neutrality, requirements for platforms, stricter data collection and sharing regulations, guidelines for government agencies' social media use, developing alternative platforms, prioritizing free speech, education initiatives about online censorship, expanding FCC oversight of social media platforms, and legal actions against tech companies for First Amendment violations. Chapter 21, Reforming the Administrative State and Reducing Bureaucratic Power. Project 2025 aims to reinstate and expand Schedule F, restructure federal agencies, implement a comprehensive regulation review, increase presidential authority over agencies, change the civil service system, implement zero-based budgeting, restrict agencies' rule-making abilities, implement sunset provisions for programs and regulations, move federal agencies out of Washington, D.C., and increase transparency in agency operations. Chapter 22, Promoting Traditional Family Values in Policy Decisions. Project 2025, Advocates, Supporting the Nuclear Family Structure, Encouraging Marriage Through Tax Incentives, Restricting Abortion Access, Appointing pro-life judges, Emphasizing parental rights and school choice, Enhancing religious liberty protections, Restructuring welfare programs to promote marriage, Opposing LGBTQ+ rights recognition, Promoting family-friendly media content, and emphasizing family-based immigration. Chapter 23, Revising Environmental Regulations to Favor Business Interests. Project 2025 proposes comprehensive review and reduction of regulations, repealing the Clean Power Plan, redefining the waters of the United States rule, revising the Endangered Species Act, streamlining the National Environmental Policy Act review process, increasing domestic energy production, withdrawing from international climate agreements, restructuring the Environmental Protection Agency, implementing stricter cost-benefit analysis for regulations, and establishing a regulatory budget system. Chapter 24, Reforming Higher Education, Targeting Tenure Systems, and Liberal Bias. Project 2025 recommends implementing periodic reviews for tenured professors, encouraging the hiring of conservative faculty, strengthening campus free speech protections, revising curricula to include conservative perspectives, reforming the accreditation process, changing the federal student loan system, revising criteria for federal research grants, targeting diversity and inclusion initiatives, expanding online education options, and creating an academic Bill of Rights. Chapter 25, Strengthening Intellectual Property Protections. Project 2025 proposes streamlining the patent application process, implementing stricter patent eligibility standards, extending copyright terms, enhancing enforcement against digital piracy, strengthening trade secret protections, taking an aggressive approach to protecting American IP rights globally, modernizing the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office, assisting small businesses and individual inventors, enhancing technology transfer from universities, and developing new IP protection frameworks for emerging technologies. Chapter 26, Reforming International Trade Policies. Project 2025 outlines reviewing and renegotiating existing trade agreements, focusing on bilateral trade agreements, reducing trade deficits through targeted tariffs, emphasizing intellectual property protection, addressing currency manipulation, securing critical supply chains, strengthening export controls, robust enforcement of trade rules, addressing digital trade issues, potentially withdrawing from the WTO, and implementing a reciprocal tax on imports. Chapter 27, Addressing Perceived Political Bias in Federal Agencies and the Supreme Court. Project 2025 proposes reinstating Schedule F for federal employees, appointing ideologically aligned leadership, implementing stricter vetting processes, revising training programs, strengthening whistleblower protections, restructuring or eliminating certain agencies, increasing congressional oversight, disbanding the Office of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Accessibility, creating bias response teams, and removing critical race theory references from federal materials. Chapter 28, Revising Federal Housing Policies and Programs. Project 2025 recommends privatizing Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, restructuring the Department of Housing and Urban Development, revising the Affirmatively Furthering Fair Housing Rule, implementing work requirements for Section 8 recipients, revising the Low-Income Housing Tax Credit Program, encouraging home ownership, reducing housing cost regulations, shifting focus from the Housing First approach, revising USDA rural housing programs, and eliminating HUD's Office of Fair Housing and Equal Opportunity. Chapter 29, Expanding School Prayer and Religious Expression in Public Institutions. Project 2025 advocates reintroducing prayer in public schools, protecting religious symbol displays, incorporating religious content into curricula, protecting faith-based student clubs, expanding protections for teachers expressing faith, mandatory religious liberty training for school staff, increasing public funding access for faith-based organizations, strengthening conscience protections for public employees, allowing explicit celebration of religious holidays, and revising the First Amendment's Establishment Clause interpretation. Chapter 30, Reforming the Federal Reserve and Monetary Policy. Project 2025 proposes reducing Federal Reserve independence, a full audit of the Fed, narrowing the dual mandate to focus on price stability, exploring commodity-backed currency options, criticizing low interest rate policies, implementing a rules-based approach to setting rates, stripping the Fed of some regulatory powers, reassessing U.S. involvement in international monetary institutions, aggressively reducing the Fed's balance sheet, and exploring alternative monetary systems. Chapter 31, Reforming Federal Labor Laws and Union Regulations. Project 2025, Advocates for a National Right-to-Work Law, changes to union election procedures, revising overtime rules, narrowing the joint employer definition, and clarifying independent contractor classification. They also propose increasing union financial reporting requirements, restricting union dues for political activities, changing the National Labor Relations Board, limiting public sector union power, and implementing periodic recertification votes for unions. Chapter 32, Strengthening Protections for Homeschooling and Parental Rights in Education. Project 2025 proposes dismantling the Department of Education, privatizing student loans, overhauling accreditation systems, and eliminating Title I funding. They also advocate for converting federal education funds to vouchers, scaling back civil rights protections, ending federal safeguards for LGBTQ+ students, stripping diversity, equity, and inclusion requirements, bolstering workforce skills, education, and prohibiting federal regulation of homeschooling. Chapter 33, Reforming the Civil Service System to make it easier to dismiss federal employees. Project 2025 recommends reinstating and expanding Schedule F, simplifying and expediting the employee removal process, implementing rigorous performance evaluations, extending the probationary period for new employees, reforming the Merit Systems Protection Board, reducing federal employee union influence, giving managers more authority in hiring and firing, revising the performance improvement plan process, implementing accountability measures for all employees, and tying job security to performance and agency alignment. Chapter 34, Expanding Domestic Mining and Resource Extraction, particularly for critical minerals. Project 2025 proposes reducing regulatory barriers, streamlining the permitting process, prioritizing domestic production over imports, revising environmental review processes, developing a national critical mineral strategy, implementing a one-stop shop permitting process, increasing funding for extraction technologies research, strengthening partnerships with allies for supply chains, offering economic incentives for domestic mining, and creating a strategic minerals reserve. Chapter 35, Reforming the Asylum System and Refugee Programs to Reduce Admissions. Project 2025 recommends implementing a safe third country policy, expanding expedited removal procedures, and raising criteria for asylum eligibility. For more information, go to the comment section below for the Project 2025 Quick Review book found on Amazon by Marko Vovk. Please like, share, and subscribe, and hit the bell for future new videos.